Hello, very warm welcome from me. My name is Silver Tamber. I'm the co-founder of Estonian World magazine and currently also editor-in-chief for Trialogue in Estonia, which is Tallinn University of Technology's online portal. And today's panel is called Explainable AI, Mind over Machine. So we will discuss the future of AI, and I'm very glad that I'm joined here by Catherine Zhou, who is the creator of the project Design Ethically, which started out as a framework for applying ethics to the design process and has now grown into a toolkit that helps teams forecast the consequences of their products. She recently completed a master's degree in AI ethics and society at the University of Cambridge and will be joining the University of Oxford as a doctoral candidate under the Oxford Internet Institute. Second, Pavel Sobotsinski. He is a computer scientist with research contributions in logic, programming, language theory, and rigorous evaluation and verification of software. He also holds a bachelor's degree from University of Sydney, Australia, and PhD from University of Aarhus, Denmark. Currently, he is also professor of trustworthy software technologies at Caltech, and has led efforts to establish the Estonian Center for Safe and Trustworthy AI. But first, let me just go through. It's a little, because we actually originally were supposed to have a little keynote presentation as well. This is not that because our speaker couldn't come, the keynote speaker, but I prepared a quick presentation, so it's sort of what is explainable artificial intelligence for, I call it the presentation for dummies. So let's just go through quickly. So explainable artificial intelligence refers to methods and techniques in artificial intelligence that make the outputs and decisions of AI models understandable to humans. The goal of XAI is to provide insights into how AI models arrive at the conclusions, ensuring that these processes are transparent and trustworthy. Key aspects of XAI: transparency, interpretability, justification, and trust and accountability. So why is XAI important? It has, obviously, it's an ethical aspect. It ensures that AI systems operate fairly and without bias, making it easier to identify and mitigate discrimination. Second, compliance. It helps meeting regulatory requirements that mandate transparency and accountability in AI systems. And the third one, user adoption. Increases user confidence and acceptance of AI technologies by making their operations comprehensible. Right, so obviously there's challenges. For example, balancing the complexity of advanced AI models with the need for interpretability is challenging. Second, scalability. It's developing scalable XAI techniques that work effectively with large and complex data sets. That's one of the challenges. And the third one, different domains may require different types of explanations, making it difficult to create universal XAI solutions. So a few examples as well. Where is XAI used? For example, medical diagnosis. XAI is used in diagnostic systems that assist doctors by suggesting potential diagnosis based on patient data. So for example, IBM Watson for Oncology supercomputer provides treatment recommendations for cancer patients. XAI techniques helped explain the reasoning behind these recommendations, making them more acceptable to healthcare professionals. Second example, AI models detect fraudulent transactions. For example, PayPal uses AI for fraud detection and employs XAI to explain why certain transactions are flagged as suspicious. Also in legal world, the AI models assist judges in making decisions about bail, sentencing, and parole by predicting the likelihood of reoffending. For example, the Compass correctional offender management profiling for alternative sanctions system in the US uses XAI to explain risk scores given to offenders. Also, self-driving cars. Waymo and Tesla use XAI to explain the decisions made by the autonomous driving system, such as why the car made a particular maneuver. Also in hiring and recruitment. In the US, the company like Highview use AI to assess video interviews and employ XAI to explain the factors behind candidate ratings. And also climate predictions. Climate researchers use XAI to explain the predictions made by complex climate models regarding future weather patterns and potential natural disasters. So in summary, explainable AI is a crucial area of AI research and development aimed at making AI systems more transparent, interpretable, and trustworthy. Right, and now we'll start with a panel, and also you can ask questions. So if we can get the code as well on the screen. Right, here we go. So you can ask questions, and we'll carry on here. So Catherine, what do you think? What's the future? How do we envision the balance between AI and human decision making evolving over the next decade? And do you think explainable AI is the future?
That's a great question, and thank you for that presentation earlier, Silver. I definitely see us continuing on this trajectory of using more and more AI tools for decision making. We're seeing this rise like exponentially over the last few years, from more trivial use cases such as students writing their papers using ChatGPT, to more significant use cases like you mentioned for like medical diagnostics and judicial decision making. And so I think it's going to continue in this path. There's a lot of hype in this area, and companies are really pushing these solutions. Whether or not I like to see this, I'm a bit worried. At the risk of sounding like a Luddite, I think we do need to be very careful. As we've seen historically, today, and in the last few years, there's been a lot of issues cropping up with the deferral of decision making to these automated technologies. And we're going to definitely unpack a lot of that into this panel. But yeah, so I'm a bit concerned, and I think that we have to approach this very carefully. And explainable AI is definitely one piece of the puzzle in a better approach to ensuring that we use these tools safely.
Pavel, same question for you.
So I agree with what Kat said, basically. I mean, I think it's certainly the trajectory we're on is that this technology will be used more and more. But I feel like a nice analogy would be it's kind of like air travel, or airplanes were discovered at the start of the 20th century. So right now it's still a very experimental technology. There's going to be a lot of plane crashes before we develop some understanding of something like safety engineering. So safety engineering in aviation is a success story where every single time there is a problem, there's a plane crash, or even some minor emergency, there's a full investigation, and then people make recommendations that then improve the industry as a whole. So I feel like we've already had some pretty bad crashes in AI in terms of societal harm. I feel like there's going to be a lot more of that coming over the next decade, but fundamentally I think that we'll arrive at the point where these things will become safer just through experience, through field experience of people using them in the wild.
What do you think, in what areas should human judgment always override AI, and why?
I almost want to say all of them, most of them. I think there should definitely, at the place where we're in right now, there should definitely be some kind of oversight, especially over, at the end of these decision-making flows, right? I think of content moderation. A lot of companies are pivoting towards algorithmic content moderation, for example, and most of these processes do include like a human person at the very end to double check, and I think that's something that we need to maintain and keep that for a while, just to have this kind of checks and balances, because there are, like you said, there have been mistakes made. So yeah.
I understand from previous conversation with you that you're also worried about how the future of AI and AI revolution in general will impact the job markets. I mean, that people losing job, and what's your take on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of the fear that we've been feeling that's very palpable in the industry and beyond is that AI is stealing our jobs, and it's an existential risk. And I think there's some merit to that. I think another thing that I'm particularly concerned about is the impact of AI on exploitation within the labor market today as it stands. So kind of behind the scenes of all of these tools that we're using is an extraordinary amount of labor needed to not only label the data, train these models, collect the data as well, and not to mention the amount of labor needed to, maintain the data centers. And a lot of this labor is happening in countries like Kenya and the Philippines and India, Latin America. There's a lot of extraction and exploitation in this realm. And so that's something that I'm particularly concerned about. And it's like this is happening at this very moment, not to mention the future more existential risks down the line for our jobs getting replaced. So I wanted to kind of highlight that dynamic.
Yeah. Right. So Pavel, I think you're also you looked a lot on the ethical side of it. And so what in your opinion, what are the ethical considerations of relying on AI for critical decisions? For example, we mentioned here before as well, healthcare and also justice and finance, etc.
Well, I'm not a specialist in ethics, but I have to say that we already have some protection from this. So in the GDPR specifies explicitly that if an algorithm is responsible for a significant decision about you, then you have the right to know how this decision was arrived, and it should also be examined by an actual human. So clearly there are all kinds of ethical considerations. One of the interesting parts about the new European Union AI Act is that they really classify applications of AI according to a scale of danger. With the sort of the top layer is like really these things should not be allowed, should be outlawed. So things like using AI for social scoring and for cyberbullying and deep fakes, this kind of stuff, right? So it's certainly a very complicated topic, and I feel like regulation. I mean, so regulation is always a controversial topic, but I feel like the regulation is definitely necessary, right? Because if there is some demand for it, then it will be built, and this demand may be nefarious, and we definitely want to avoid making our society a future dystopia, right? So,
how much do you use yourself in everyday life AI, and what in what form?
Actually, maybe I'm one of the very few people on Earth who hasn't been blown away by the amazing technology that is LLMs. I mean, I can see that it's very impressive. I mean, I've played with it. I haven't really found a use case for it in my day-to-day life. I quite like writing myself, so I find this intellectual stimulation quite nice. I mean, maybe one thing that I'm a little bit worried about is that as we rely on AI more and more to kind of do the thinking for us, our brains will slowly atrophy, right? So if one of the reasons people go to the gym is to sort of exercise muscles that otherwise would just die off, right? If we don't use our brains, then is that a really good direction to be heading? So me personally, I haven't used it very much. I mean, of course I use it for work, in the sense that I'm interested in technologies that make the machine learning and especially sort of frontier AI more safe, more trustworthy. But yeah, that's maybe I'm a Luddite.
What about you, Catherine?
I actually am quite in the same boat as Pavel, and it's funny that you mentioned like the not practicing writing enough or whatnot. There's studies that show that like over the last year or so, certain words have increased significantly amongst academic publications, and it's because people are using like ChatGPT and other sources to help write their journal articles and whatnot. And I think that's something that we should definitely be a little wary about, considering also that these LLMs are trained on data a lot of times which is not necessarily representative of like the entire diversity of thought in the world, and so it can tend to amplify certain beliefs, certain epistemologies, ideologies, and that's something we need to really interrogate and examine.
What about the audience? Can you raise hands? Who is using AI for on a sort of daily basis?
Wow.
Wow.
Impressive.
Quite a bit, yeah. More than half, I guess. Yeah. Um, coming back to ethics, and you already mentioned regulations as well, the EU regulation. What do you think how much influence would that have over across the other part of the world? I mean, let's say China, US.
Well, I mean, so clearly the US is very much behind Europe in terms of data protection. But these regulations, regulatory frameworks are also being discussed and being worked on in the US. I mean, China is a completely different world, right? I think, things like, for example, technologies like facial recognition are very much widespreadly used throughout China by the governments, by the authorities. And I think, at least in Europe, this is definitely a red line. This is something that's not going to happen in Europe. So yeah, I mean, I guess we just have to put up with the fact that we live in it's a very varied approach to things like democracy and human dignity around the world, and that's then reflected in how technology is used. Yeah.
Yeah, and Catherine, I think you also you mentioned before in previous conversation that you're a bit concerned about the impact on environment.
Yeah.
So can you elaborate on that and then see
Absolutely.
what's the solution then?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times when we think about these technologies, when we think about the cloud, for example, it gives this sense of, oh, it's something in the ether, it's very eco-friendly. There's not even a slight kind of actual material impact on our planet. But the reality is that it takes a significant amount of energy, water, land, etc., to create these systems, these apparatuses for AI tools. And so this comes from like the data centers needed to power all of this compute that's running. And where do you get the resources for these data centers? Where are these data centers being built? Some of them are being built in Sweden, where I live right now. And I'm sure there are certain ones here in Estonia as well. And the materials oftentimes, like for example, lithium, really common material used in these data centers, is being mined increasingly, right? And a lot of places in Latin America, for example, like Chile, are experiencing the effects of this egregious mining. And a lot of indigenous communities are kind of pushing back, saying, hey, we want our land back. And there's this definite element of extraction that's happening at a very rapid pace. And I was reading about how whenever you do a ChatGPT query uses like 15 times more energy than a Google search. And a Google search already uses a good amount of energy. So it makes you really think about these things in a new light.
But still, how obviously, as just saw, more and more people are using it.
Yeah.
How to overcome that? I mean, that issue, because more and more people will use it, and what's the
Absolutely.
solution in there?
I think raising awareness is one thing, because this is definitely still sort of the hidden underside, I think, amongst lay people, right? When they're using these tools, they don't really see it, and even the user interface that you're working with on ChatGPT, for example, it really just feels like you're talking to a computer program, as opposed to, it doesn't really display the whole amount of materials that are used, and the labor that is used to create the answer that you just generated. And so I think raising awareness is really good. I think regulation is necessary. I think there needs to be this kind of intersectional regulation too, with it between the AI regulatory scene and also climate regulatory scenes. There's a lot of crossover over here. Yeah.
Now, I don't see your questions, unfortunately, at the moment. Maybe one of the technical team can sort that one out. But while waiting that, if there is any questions, I'm happy to take right now directly from the audience. Yep, this gentleman over there. Yep. Can we have another microphone, please? Just a second. Sorry, because I'm supposed to see them on iPad here, but I don't see. So AI, eh?
No, it's not working.
I'll get you another one. Just a second. Okay, very good, thank you. Right, while I'm waiting for the microphone, I've got now the questions here. So one question from a gentleman called Teet. Is the fear of doomsday off the table? We kind of already touched it, but yeah, who wants to answer that question? Is the fear of doomsday off the table? I guess what it's meant is...
This is the AGI taking over, right?
Yeah, taking over the world.
Yeah, so I mean, so this is certainly something that has been discussed and thought about. The idea is that this is artificial general intelligence, right? So this is the next step of AI that will be able to construct frontier AI models so sophisticated that they will have superhuman intelligence in all areas and be completely general. And one day, such an AGI system might decide that actually it would just prefer if humans were not around, right? Or the oxygen in the atmosphere is actually not that good for electronics, so why not just pump the oxygen out and take over the resources, take over the planet, right? So that's certainly a scenario. I mean, it sounds like science fiction, right? But many of the most famous, most influential people in the sphere are actually worried about this, are actually worried about giving such powerful systems the power to control resources and then to make decisions that affect humans because, they will be much better at us, right? So, I mean, just to get back to the theme of explainability, somehow explainability is not enough, right? Because explainability relies on human psychology, right? It's how do you explain a decision of a system to a human? Well, we're not that sophisticated sometimes. Sometimes explanations are very deep and detailed and long, and we lose patience and we just go, okay, just go ahead, right? So actually humans are easily lied to, right? So if you have a super intelligent AI system, then they will be very good at lying to us and getting it its own way.
Actually, there's a comment here from a person called Carlotta, I assume she's a lady, who says that we're talking too much about the bad, negative aspects. So can you tell us, Catherine and Pavel, what about the good things? I think we previously, with you, Pavel, we discussed this, that it could help with the democracy and perhaps in transparency in general. Is that one of the good things?
Well,
or
one of the things where I think we should be excited is so this is actually a concept due to Yoshua Bengio, who's one of the most famous AI researchers in the world. So he has this concept of AI scientist, right? So this is the idea is when we have this superhuman intelligence, we really put them in the context where they're able to produce science, not have access to resources, not be able to make decisions for us, but develop more advanced, develop breakthroughs in biology, in medicine, in chemistry, physics, mathematics, etc. Right? So we can definitely harness this intelligence to advance us as a species, but we must be careful not to sort of let it have agency. That's I think the main point. So yeah, I think there's a lot of scope for optimism, but we should also be careful, right? So I think this kind of tech utopia where we believe that technology can only be used for good no longer exists. We all know that technology can also result in negative outcomes.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it reminds me of this tweet that I saw a while back about how this person was saying we could have easily designed AI tools to help do the most boring jobs in the world, and yet we've designed them to do all the fun stuff like painting and music and whatever. And I mean, I think in an ideal world, what I would love to see, a positive outcome would be that we we used these tools to do the shitty work, right? There's a lot of shitty jobs out there that, preferably humans wouldn't have to do. Instead of taking over like the creative industry and, that has a whole nother layer of exploitation there because you're stealing art from artists and whatnot, and letting humans do that. And I mean, that goes into a whole other conversation on like societal outcomes and beliefs, but that's what I would like to see.
There's also a question about more publications. So basic question is, instead of being afraid of AI, could we get more publications online so that there's wider coverage of research for research checks and balances? I mean, Pavel, you're working in the university, and of course sometimes people complain generally that people don't know what scientists, research is doing. I mean, what do you think? I mean, is that one way to go?
Well, I mean, these tools are already starting to be used in research, right? So I think that's a growing area, and very. I mean, I think in the next 10 years we'll see enormous change in the way that researchers actually do their job, precisely because of this additional power that AI gives you, and that can only be good, right? That will produce scientific breakthroughs that will, fuel our sort of advancements as a species. I think that's definitely something to be optimistic about.
Yeah. Also, again, we already touched it a bit, but there is a question: is the AI generating new knowledge? I guess it does, or doesn't it?
I mean, it's taking input from historically collected data, and it's maybe remixing it. But I don't know that it's like, I don't know if you could philosophically call it new knowledge in that way.
So, some people are still like unconvinced about this, right? So there's this term that people call LLM stochastic parrots.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So it's that you don't actually produce something new, but you sort of mix around and the probabilities. But I mean, sometimes it's really difficult to tell because you can sort of throw quite sophisticated logical puzzles at these things, and after a bit of prompting, they do seem to sort of go through a process that we would understand as thinking.
Also, do you see the potential for AI to take the bias out of human decision making in future? I mean, could that be one of the solutions?
Remove bias.
Bias, as of human decision making, so that the role of XAI, as we discussed, would be to make as good decisions that, like for example, let's say the recruitment process. Currently, there could be I could be biased when I decide who to employ, but could we have one day such a good XAI that will decide? Make that decision completely out of it, that it would be very, very, how should I say it? Kind of based on meritocracy, I guess. Yeah.
I've heard of some researchers working on like counterfactual reasoning models where they are trying to, intentionally ensure that the models are correcting for these biases. I still believe that there should be some human oversight, of course, at the end. I don't think that we're at that point yet. I'm sure there are cases where sometimes AI can mitigate for some of this, but it definitely needs human oversight.
Pavel, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree totally with what Kat was saying. I also think that, again, coming back to this concept of explainability, I think as humans, we are somehow quite bad at reasoning about probabilities, right? This is why casinos exist and betting houses exist, because people are somehow, people's weakness in reasoning about probability is exploitable. And at the fundamental level, all of these machine learning AI systems are based on probabilities. So I think that's something that we need to get better as a species in order to understand and be able to, trust these systems and be able to make some predictions about safety and sort of, let's say, window of errors. All of this requires us to become a little bit better at understanding probability. So I think that's something that we will need to focus more, at the school level and university level in the future as to having a better understanding of probability so that we can reason about these systems.
And a point that you mentioned earlier about explainable AI as it relates to psychology brought something to mind. So I think, a lot of times when we've talked about explainable AI, like we've almost looked at it as if the end user is the expert. And a lot of times in the past, they were people that understood these models more thoroughly than the layperson, right? And nowadays that we're seeing more and more of this technology being used by lay people, I think there's definitely, from a design perspective, right, there's a concern that I have around how much of this will just become like compliance checkboxing of like, okay, we explained something to the people, it came out like a terms and conditions report, and they probably didn't read it, but we had it for them, and they saw it, and they used it. And that's something that I'm musing over and questioning about, like how will this play out for the day-to-day consumer?
It's like the accept all cookie thing on the websites. Yes.
Someone is also asking, shouldn't AI also have a seat on such a panel? That's a good question. In a way, it does, because the presentation at the beginning it was actually compiled with the help of AI. So, so there you go. But actually, for you, Pavel, also, I want to touch upon a little bit about. I understand you want to establish the Estonian Center for Safe and Trustworthy AI. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, so the plan is, it's interesting. So I was involved in putting together it's something called the Horizon Teaming Project. It's basically sort of something that's funded half by the EU and half by the Estonian government. And the idea is that under the auspices of this program, you're supposed to set up something like a research institute. So this was the idea, and discussing with many colleagues and people in the public sector and entrepreneurs. I think because Estonia is in this kind of a unique position of having a very sort of established reputation for being very agile in terms of ICT adoption. I mean, for example, I'm an academic, and wherever I go to a conference around the world, and I say, and I work in Estonia, people go, oh, e-government, right? So somehow e-government is this thing that people know about Estonia. Which is a remarkable achievement, right, for a country of just over 1 million people. So I think certainly from the people who I've discussed with at sort of Estonian public policy level, there is a lot of ambition in continuing this trend of adopting AI in all facets of, for example, e-government, public sector, and this is already taking place. There's already very ambitious targets on how many public services include AI components. So we are kind of in the early stages of this, but nevertheless, it's a thing that's accelerating. So all of these kinds of, let's say, positive points, but also the negative points, I feel like are something that we are going to experience probably in Estonia before they're experienced in other places in the world. So I think it kind of makes sense to sort of bring together, to have some kind of a institution that brings together academics who sort of contribute and will do research in this area of trustworthiness. I can get into more technical detail about what I mean by that word, but we don't have the time. But as well as the public sector institutions and startups and have a sort of a common forum. Produce one of the things that I'm really excited about is producing a PhD school that really focuses on producing the next generation of experts, right? So one of the things that I think Estonia is quite weak on is not enough Estonians do a PhD. But when you look at AI, and when you look at sort of the big AI, the sort of the giants, companies like OpenAI, Google, Microsoft. In order to become an engineer now who works on these sort of frontier AI systems, a PhD is the minimum requirement, right? So if we want to stay competitive here, we need to produce our own experts. So that's also a component. So I think it's some kind of a hub for Estonia that will focus on artificial intelligence and and the Estonian experience of it is the general idea. Now, this thing doesn't yet exist, right? So we're still waiting on final funding decisions. So,
Okay.
but that's the vision at least.
So it could be also a good sort of international, global opportunity for again for Estonia, or is it more like internal thing? I mean, do you think that would also have?
Of course, the idea would be that we would collaborate with. I mean, there's being institutions like this are being set up all around the world. There's just one recently that's been set up in the UK, sort of the AI Safety Institute. So all of them are. I mean, the different institutes have a slightly different vision, but I mean, the idea would be that this would really be tailored for needs of Estonia and the things that are happening here.
Okay. There's also another question about the transparency. We briefly, touched upon that before, but there's a specific question from a gentleman called Chris. In the old days of AI, in 2018, for example, explainable AI meant showing and revealing what was inside models and decisions AI made. Can the panel cover thoughts on why fewer AI vendors and tools still, I guess, what's meant to do this, not don't do this? Is that correct? Is the guy called Chris here? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Don't do it. Okay. Yeah. So do you want to answer that, Pavel, maybe, or Kat? So maybe shall I go through again that one? It's just basically well, you want to explain that what you actually meant here? What once?
Panels like 2018, 2017.
Mm-hmm.
Google's kind of ethical AI teams will lost their job itself, and they would endlessly say they have transparent, explainable AI, but never explain or reveal it.
Yeah, this is like the self-driving car that's always 1 year ahead, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this one problem is that research. Yeah. So the general comment is that it used to be so up until about 2021, research on frontier AI systems was published. So around 3 years ago, everything went dark. We don't. I mean, so when OpenAI releases a new ChatGPT, they publish a very vague paper that sort of gives you the approximate size of it in terms of number of parameters, basically how much compute went into this, etc. But the algorithms are not published, so we don't really know anything about how these models were constructed and how they work. Now there are people. I mean, there are these systems are extremely complex, right? So they're just unbelievably huge. And so nobody, not even the engineers who construct them, understand really why they work and how they work. Now, there's a whole sort of scientific field that's called mechanistic interoperability that is trying to basically then post hoc construct some structure and try to understand some of the mechanisms of how these massive neural networks work. But we're still at the very early stages of this.
And I would say a lot of these companies too, I think they've used explainable AI and fairness and whatnot as almost like ethics washing in some sense of just like saying, we did this, we have a framework on it, we have guidelines on it, but then they might be doing something very different behind the scenes. So, yeah.
Sorry, but looking in the future, Catherine, what do you think, what would be the future, let's say, 10, 20 years down the line? You mentioned, okay, let's put it this way. One thing we touched about are obviously regulations, and we talked about EU regulation, etc. But another thing, I guess, is education. What do you think? Is that what we need? Education about AI?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. I think also what I'm actually really looking forward to seeing more of in the next few years is more worker organizing. And this is something that really excites me. And for example, in 2023, last summer, they started the first Africa Content Moderators Union because there's a lot of like content moderating and AI data work happening in places like Kenya and surrounding region. That's very exploitative. People are being paid like less than $2 an hour, maybe less. Same in the Philippines. And so they formed that union. They've been really advocating for their rights. And I think we need to see more and more of that kind of collective action amongst these different worker groups who are all part of this AI supply chain. And I mean, we've heard a lot in Western media about the unions happening at Alphabet and Amazon and whatnot. And I really hope to see that on the different tiers within.
So we need trade unions against AI.
Yes, yeah, maybe that's part of it.
Yeah, okay. Pavel, what's your take if we are here again 2034, 44, where we're at?
Oh God, so I'm not going to get into the business of predicting the future. Well, let's hope we're still here, for one. But no, one thing that gives me optimism, let's say, is, I'm really, I totally agree with Kat again. Sorry, I keep saying the same thing. I mean, for example, workers also, I mean, one of the reasons why these companies like Google became so huge and so successful is because they had a very talented workforce that worked for them because they had cool slogans like "Don't be evil" and etc. Now all that is gone, and workers don't have any power, and so yeah, we need to rebalance the things. But I mean, one of the things that gives me optimism is that I think as a species we're much more mature about technology now than we were in the 90s. So I remember when I was at university, this was mid-90s, the web was just starting. So that was the new big thing. Everyone was extremely excited about the web, and it was going to democratize the world. You're going to be able to chat with anyone at any time. You're going to have access to all the world's information at your fingertips. And this was absolutely fantastic. And of course, a lot of this is absolutely fantastic, right? It's amazing that I can just take out my phone and I have access to Wikipedia and basically can read up about any topic at any time. But we also have learned that this technology creates a lot of downsides, with social media and various weird people getting elected around the world because of nefarious network effects of social media. So I think we've learned to be a bit more wary about the future. And I think that's a good thing, right? So we have to be optimistic about the potential, but also careful to avoid the dangers.
Right, thank you. So let's hope we're here in 10 and 20 years' time, and we hope for a logical and transparent AI. And so thank you again, Catherine Zoe and Pavel Sobocinski, and thank you, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.